think is going to be the best panel of the entire week. Because, you know, the panel that we've assembled, I think, will both inspire you, but also tell you a little bit more about the work that's ahead. So it is my great pleasure to, an honor to moderate today's discussion. And I do have to read a little bit because each one of these folks deserves that. So first, I'd like to introduce Jesse Williams, producer of Hoops, Hopes, and Dreams, which tells the untold story of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and a team of civil rights activists how they rallied young voters on the basketball courts. Next up, we have Sumi Parekh, Executive Director of Group Effort Initiative, which is a breaking barriers to entry for underrepresented talent in our industry. Next up, Dr. Stacy Smith. They're coming. It's like basketball or some other sport where you clap as they come out. Clap as they come out. Woo, we need some hype. All right, Dr. Stacy Smith, the founder of the USC Annenberg Inclusion Initiative, and her esteemed colleagues that are with us in the audience, whose research has been the driving force shaping the conversation around representation in film, and a longtime friend and colleague of mine. So pleased to have her here. And then Tracy Oliver, the brilliant screenwriter, director, producer, and showrunner, whose film The Blackening is featured on the new inclusion list. Welcome. And Dewayne Perkins, a talented actor, producer, writer, and comedian who wrote and produced The Blackening with Tracy. I mean, let's give them a round of applause. They don't even have to speak yet. But it really is an honor. It's an honor to be a part of Adobe and to lead the Adobe Foundation and to have some of our grantees both on this panel but also in the audience. So really appreciate you all are joining this conversation because diversity in the industry, both on camera and off, and creating career pathways is a critical part of what Adobe and the Adobe Foundation are pushing for. So we're excited for this conversation, so thanks for joining. The panel comes at a pivotal moment. You could decide what that pivot is. We'll forget what happened on Monday, and we'll move to Friday, where we're going to talk about how we're making change in the world together. But just ahead of Sundance, USC released their second inclusion list, a data-driven ranking of films and creators based on their commitment to diversity both in front of and behind the camera. The list, in collaboration with the Adobe Foundation, it's like a personal plug, shines a spotlight on where progress is being made and where we still have work to do. And one of the things I love about the inclusion list with Stacy's great leadership and Kate is it's really about celebrating who's getting it right so that we can really make a movement together. So at Adobe, we're also thrilled to announce our support of group efforts. Sumi, thank you for joining us today. Through the Adobe Film Fund, the program reflects our commitment to addressing inequities in funding, career paths, and training opportunities because the entertainment industry isn't just what we watch on the screen. And so really thinking about how we broaden this conversation is a commitment of ours, and I think of each of the people that's gathered here. So with that, we're gonna get started. So for all of you, and I'm sorry, there's a few all questions that we might not get to everybody. But we're gonna start, since we're at Sundance, I'm curious if anyone has thoughts, I know this group well enough to know there's plenty of thoughts, about what the role festivals like Sundance play in amplifying inclusive storytelling. Don't make me call on you.
I can start. And so I think this will be a plug for Sundance's wonderful Ignite program. So as Amy mentioned, Group Effort Initiative, we help underrepresented communities get into the entertainment industry and have long-lasting careers. And one wonderful partnership that we have with Sundance, and now that I found out Adobe's a huge funder of it as well, is the Ignite program. So we've been able to bring 10 of our participants from LA to various Sundance film festivals, and they get to work the festival as well as participate in the Ignite program, which helps young and aspiring filmmakers, I think ages 18 to 25, learn more about the festival circuit, how to create a project, how to understand the business of it, et cetera, et cetera. So thanks to festivals like this, not only are they paving the way in creating a platform for inclusive storytelling, they're also helping future storytellers tell their own stories. And I think that's an amazing thing for this festival.
I guess I'll jump in. I'll shout out the Sundance Labs. And I never did it, but I was a mentor twice and got a chance to meet a lot of great writers, and a lot of them at the time had really niche stories and felt like Sundance was the only outlet that accepted it, that encouraged it, that gave them a platform and connected them directly to people like me. And they were shocked that I loved it so much. And I was grateful to Sundance because I don't get sent material like that. Because of what I do a lot of commercial stuff, but I'm always looking for really interesting, diverse voices, women of color in particular. And when I got sent those scripts, I was like, how beautiful, how unique, how special. And I know that without Sundance, I would never have gotten that material, because how do you get it? It has to go through the agencies. And agencies kind of weed out stuff that's not commercial or mainstream or doesn't have, a broad appeal. So for me, Sundance is necessary to even find those people that are out there, and it's a good connector. So without Sundance, I wouldn't have met those people, and I wouldn't have been exposed to that type of writing. So I'm grateful as a mentor, but then also I know how necessary it is on the other side.
And I would say, as a consumer, like, I came last year for the first time and just watched films. And I think access is very important to kind of inspire the next generation of people. And something that I recognized was like the access to inspiration. Like, I went to the Shorts block, and just to see a series of creations from a bunch of different people really opened up my mind as to what I can create myself, and it inspired me to do a short this year. So just being able to participate in the art is, in a way, hoping to further let the art be created.
Thanks. I'm going to sort of weave, and then maybe Stacy, I saw you were about to jump in, as I guess for each of you, or maybe both personally and professionally, why do you think it's still important to have underrepresented communities on screen in film and television? What has it done for your career? What do you think it's enabling in the industry? And then what's the data we're seeing? So maybe Stacey, you can answer last.
Well, I wanted to jump in on the last question,
Oh,
and then maybe
do it.
someone
I
can
love that
tag
for you.
team with me on keeping it going. We've worked with Sundance since, I think, we started in 2012. And in terms of their legacy, but it also answers the question you're asking. They're concerned about women and women of color behind the camera. They commissioned research to examine women as directors, women as producers. This was back in 2013, 2012. And then when the data came up with a Female Filmmakers Initiative, right? And a fund. Then we released research on the lack of underrepresented critics, non-white critics, and women getting press badges. What did Sundance do? They created an entire critics initiative, right? And why is this important? Because we know that there is a moderate to strong relationship between the people who get their films accepted in dramatic competition in the US. That correlates right to appearing on the top 100 films that lead to generational wealth and career sustainability. So this pipeline is absolutely critical to ensuring the long-term success. And why? I mean, I just came from a spiritual experience of Cynthia Erivo talking about starring in Wicked, and I see what it means to my students at USC. I see what it means to Los Angeles. I see what it means to the US and the world when it is crucial right now, because people are saying merit looks like a small fraction of the population, and merit to me looks like Cynthia Erivo. That's what merit is. And a place like Sundance and a place like the Inclusion List celebrates everyone, right? Top of the game, doing well. And it's not based on white, cisgender, male, specific categories. It's about everyone and who is rising to the top. And we're going to celebrate them in the choices that they're making.
Anybody else want to give Stacey a clap?
Thank you very much.
Anybody else want to weigh in on why having underrepresented folks on camera is critical for you, for your community, for us?
I mean, I think the most obvious thing for me personally is I want to see someone like me on screen. I think that's important, one, because there's a lot of stereotypes about people of color, about women of color, and it's nice to see someone tell my story and other underrepresented community stories in an authentic and meaningful way that doesn't cause negative bias, especially with where we are on Monday. And I think things are going to get worse. So I think having platforms like this and festivals like this give an opportunity for us to see a diversity of human experiences, and for people like me to see that, hey, I can still be empowered and have hope for who I can be, even though if the world around me tells me differently.
And I would say it's critical for many reasons. One, I just feel like the same stuff is boring. Like, as a consumer, I'm like, next, wrap it up, what's next? And then as a creator, growing up, even wanting to be an actor, being like queer and black, there was just not enough. And I fortunately was like, oh, I don't know how this is sustainable because I don't see people doing it. So why would I think I'm special enough to be able to do it?
Right.
And I pivoted to writing. But most of my friends pivoted to quitting because I also had to have a certain level of access to even pursue writing. And so I think just being able to see people do it gives people the permission to try to do it themselves. And I think that is essential to allowing people to want to do it, period.
I would say, obviously, this conversation in this safe space is necessary, inspirational, and well-intentioned, but we are the only group, non-white people, the only people who ever are even asked this question. Representation matters, of course. You wouldn't, there's no other, white people aren't asked, why is it important for your daughter to be able to look at girls that look like her on screen? It puts us in a position to have to audition for our validity and have to, prove that it's something that somebody should have to pay attention to. It's fairly preposterous. And we know why representation matters. We see its effects every day, and especially in this changing, ever-changing, sinking world. Media, narrative otherwise, is the lens through which we see the world and interpret humanity and find and discover humanity from orientations that we're not familiar with, et cetera. It's the only way you can take it from a statistic or a name or a political slogan or weapon to be a person who was born and had a childhood and as a mom. And this thing, it's absolutely political. It directly affects legislation and people's ability not to be suffocated to death in all forms and fashions. It's how we allow a certain demographic to be shot to death in the street and filmed for ratings, and we move on and go eat. But if somebody, if other more humanized groups have that experience, we're stunned. So it speaks for itself. So I can understand it's a little exhausting.
And to add on to that, and
I was just going to add, off of what Jesse's saying, it does humanize us, and it always feels like that should go without saying, because I grew up watching a lot of white content and never thinking that was weird. And then when you're on the other side of it and you're trying to make content with people that look like you have to prove that white people find you human. And I always find that so weird. But when Girls Trip came out and it made like $150 million, you don't get there without white people showing up. Thank you. But people were really, really stunned that white people showed up to see an all-black cast. And I was like, it looked funny, and it's not about being black necessarily. It's just for black women having a good time, in the same way that I love Bridesmaids and I love a lot of rom-coms with Julia Roberts and Reese Witherspoon. There are white people that can look at our movies and find us to be normal and funny too. And I think just as it is important for us to see ourselves, it's important for white people to see us too, because I hate that it has to be like that, but we are normal. And you do need to see that on screen sometimes to even know that, because there's a lot of assumptions and stereotypes that are made just because you're going off of the news or you're going off of, whatever propaganda is being said about certain groups of people. And there's a lot more to us that's not being displayed. So I think we have to fight to show our humanity. And it's not just for us, it's for everybody.
That does take practice for the audience. I remember having a conversation with a very successful couple directors. I remember when, I don't know which Hunger Games it was, but one of the, obviously a big franchise, they had the character Rue, played by Amanda Stenberg, right? And that's based on books that are massive, and that's why they have a big audience. Everybody's read the damn book. It says she's black. It says her skin is the color of the other guy, Thresh, and that's the Black District. Somehow in all these fantasies, the black people are still slaves, no matter, even though they have imagination everywhere else. But it was very clear that this girl was black. And she's portrayed by a light-skinned black girl. And there was, I don't know if you recall, there was a huge internet outrage because this character was Jennifer Lawrence's character looked at her and had to, when she died, it reminded her of her sister, and she was super empathetic and moved by this loss of life. And the audience, the white audience, a segment of it, was sincerely confused. I don't think it was all, I'm not going to throw it all away as mean-spirited. They were sincerely unable to access empathy for this character because she was black. They were asking online, how am I supposed to care? This is bullshit. She's supposed to be white. She's got to be white because I'm supposed to care because the main character cares. They don't have the tools in their toolbox to access because they've lived their entire life with ever having to care about a black girl. That's not part of their life in any way, shape, or form. And that's real. It was a panic. And I think it was also confusing for them themselves, like a malfunctioning robot. They didn't have access to tears for you. And that's a confession of sorts as to why this isn't just going to be solved with Ariel. It needs to happen in all different ways. It needs to happen with disabilities and people who are differently able. In every way that they exist, and not just to be commented on or pet or exotified, just to be Denise.
Jesse, I'm curious, just obviously throughout your career, but more recently, just kind of building on what you just said, is this idea of practice for the audience. What has the industry been practicing that we need to build more muscle around to do better at this work? How have we started to make strides that we need to keep pushing on? Maybe also what should we throw away?
From what I've seen two strains. I do see sincere progress. I also saw the trap of performative diversity, which is around the season. We all remember the season of George Floyd, just to put it in a curt way, where people do their black square and they create a role. I mean, speaking of confessions, all these businesses that have to hire somebody. I'm not going to stop being racist. I need to hire somebody and pay them a lot of money to police my racism, to keep me from only hiring white men. That confession that is for all these companies with this DEI stuff. So there's that performance that then just expires, and it also sets you up to. We certainly, I definitely have seen a lot of hiring people that they don't know well enough to know whether they're qualified, but it gives you a black friend, and then they fail because you starve them to death. Yeah. And then now I don't see. See, I tried, and then they don't have to do it again, and they're validated, and you're stuck. So the performative nature of it, I think, is curled back around, and it's abandoned the whole segment. I think we're going to talk about mentorship and the role of mentorship later, and that's a huge part of it. But I do see roles opening up. I do see space for writers to write black weird, to just be yourself. There's tremendous stuff being made. We have more outlets and channels. I'm super optimistic about all creativity, not race aside. Truly, just cultures finding ways to express themselves. They all have a home, and shows, people writing for their shows and their movies and defending them if they get canceled prematurely, and finding new homes. So I'm super optimistic creatively. Pressure bust pipes. We're gonna figure it out.
Well, Stacey, maybe you can bring in a little bit of what's the data telling us about what we're doing right, and what we should keep focusing on, because I do think there's a lot of reason for optimism and progress that's been made, but we're certainly not done.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of trends that we can point to. I mean, if we're looking behind the camera, there's some really strong behind the camera data that isn't shrinking back, and that's where the concern is, right? You have to have people behind the camera. We, on the inclusion list this year, for the first time, highlighted editors, right? These are editors that have worked multiple times on ensuring content is inclusive.
Clap it for the editors.
Bro, people aren't highlighting that's a really important role. I mean, there's so much and so many choices that go into that position, right? And we have to make sure that director, writer, all the below the line and above the line unit heads and their teams are moving in the right direction, and the people, right, that are working with those teams that want to be in the industry. But I think about, too, what's going right. And you can look at the inclusion list. I think it's .com or .org? .org, I get it wrong every time. Horrible, I know, not a marketing person. But there's two things that I think are unbelievably exciting. And it's because I'm a college professor that I see this and I see it borne out in the data. Our students tell us what's going to fail before it fails. Gen Z is dialed in. 2040 is coming. 2040 is coming, right? Caucasians will be in the minority, right, in the US. They have a taste and a sensibility. What, 150 million people voted in this country? There's 340 million people in the United States. Gen Z is driving decision-making about the audience. And what they want is a lot of what you were just articulating. And they're canceling it out of the chute when it looks like the boring stuff that you were just talking about. That to me is really exciting because it's going to have to put pressure on these companies that are making changes. I mean, Netflix is primarily girls and women, and their overproportional representation on people of color on screen. We monitor them every year. They are leading everything. We need them to keep leading and opening up the resources so that content creators, like the people on this panel, and actors keep getting to satisfy the audience. Because I truly believe Gen Z will change this because their appetites are in direct opposition to what's going on in DC right now.
It's and this is more of a question than a statement, in that Netflix stats that you just listed, and they're the most profitable and successful?
They're doing pretty
damn well, right?
If you compare subscribers or views to what people are bringing in at the box office, there's no comparison, hand over fist.
So diversity, and this has been proven with the data, the research coming out of your university, and I know Ralph Bunch, diversity is more profitable.
100%.
It's not charity.
100%.
And it's consistently framed as charity. Help us by having diversity. What are you talking about? You make more money. The excuse was always, it doesn't travel. Black doesn't travel. We would. I would love to. But it's about money. It's not about race. It's more profitable.
Well,
You're lying.
And the hegemony is really problematic because they're putting underrepresented folks in financial terms. So they can be openly racist in their conversations because it doesn't make money. The magic sell is underrepresented lead, underrepresented cast. That actually globally makes the most money. We have the most sophisticated structural equation models.
You know how staggering that is in a hyper-capitalistic society? I would rather lose money than have you on my screen and in my living room.
But that is exactly what's happening.
I know.
People say, show them that it makes money. I'm like, they don't want to make money. Because if they did, they'd follow the data.
The stats data is a big fear, is the fear that drives a lot of this. I think that, I always think that we need to lead the charge with this conversation, the data, the financial factor, because it's always couched in a favor to us. It's like the myth of aid to Africa. There's no such thing.
Yes, and
They're
that's why
you.
I think what Hollywood, the industry could do better is the people higher up with power should quit and pass away.
So there's
Get
a
that on the
solution.
ballot right away.
That got to
been
go.
offered.
They gotta go. They gotta go.
If they quit, they should also pass away,
Yes.
which is why it's like they're already out of
both.
there. But I love it.
Well, and I think it also speaks to what, Sumi, you are focused on, which is how do you get decision makers in the right room so that we're
That's not going to
having
happen. I do feel like there's an agenda. I mean, I'll speak candidly about my time at Apple, but there was an actual agenda to not make content by people of color. And I was stunned by that. And the most disappointing part about it was that they gave me a really great deal. And I thought to myself, if you're putting money behind me and you're investing this much, that has to mean that you're going to back my shows and put it on the air. That didn't mean that. And then I had to ask myself the question of what that really meant that you gave me a deal. And it meant that you can say you have Tracy Oliver on your slate. It meant that you can say you have people of color. And that's part of the problem too, is when you ask for certain things or you want more diversity, they say, well, we made 4 Tyler Perry movies this year. Jordan Peele has a movie coming out. So they'll just use certain people and say, well, we are creating content. And it's furthering those individuals' careers, but it's not really making a dent for, diversity at large. But that's how they answer those questions. So I became a token. I didn't even realize that I was one until after the fact. But yeah, I made every single press announcement of here's who's on our slate, here's who we have deals with. But then you never actually made a show.
You're on the college brochure. You know, you go to like a white university
Exactly.
and put you on the poster.
Yeah.
Well, I am going to do a bit of a pivot because I want to make sure this is a group that for whom mentorship I know is a really critical part. And so, Sumi, I'm going to start with you, just because I know Brycey, who's a colleague of mine that's here, talks about Sumi. She's like, Amy, you have a crush on her. And I do. From the first moment I spoke with Sumi, I was like, this is somebody that is changing the way that this industry is going to work. And I think that's because you believe in the idea of both mentorship and talent and finding talent on and off camera, but in industry and not in industry. And so I'm curious if you can tell me more about group effort and some of the work you've been doing around mentorship and what it's meant both for your beneficiaries and participants, but really what is it doing in the industry? And then, of course, everyone tag on to that.
Yeah, so group effort initiative I think is a little unique with the rest of the wonderful panelists, but we really focus on behind the camera, below the line jobs, so on-set production, and those corporate jobs, when you work in the Disney corporate office, the Apple corporate office, because our whole belief system is if you have underrepresented people at the top and you can get them from entry level all the way to the top, then they're going to be the ones that bring it down and help at the bottom. So they may not pass away or they may not quit necessarily, which we can all hope, or they will, but at least we can try to drive up the cycle to help them get from entry to mid to exec level and then come back and help their own communities. And it's a long pathway to that, but we are trying to do it as hard as we can. And we started in August 2020. We started during the heart of COVID. Production had slowed down. A lot of layoffs were happening in the entertainment industry. Our entry-level folks and our mid-level folks were struggling to just keep their jobs and get jobs. And a lot of them are first generation. A lot of them did not go to college, and we don't require a college degree, not even 2-year, not 4-year. We have a lot of non-traditional folks in our organization. And then you're also dealing with the fact that they don't have jobs. The industry's shut down. They can't network anymore. So that's when we decided, hey, there is a significance and a need to start a mentorship program. And so the way that we started it is we actually pivoted a little bit. We were like, well, let's start by matching, someone from this underrepresented community with someone similar. We actually did it opposite. We took a lot of our white industry professionals that we are working with and actually told them, hey, I think you guys really need to understand that you are missing a whole bunch of other populations and groups. So we actually matched the white part of the entertainment industry with all of our participants. And we trained those mentors that, hey, there's gonna be a lot of bias that you are gonna have that you don't realize you have, but we want you, because you are the ones making the hiring decisions, to spend 6 months to a year with our participants from all these communities and really understand their struggles, why they're having a hard time, why they don't have that insider knowledge, because they don't have that rich dad to help them. They're working 5 or 6 different jobs and they don't have the time to network. They don't have the time, so you're going to be that network for them. So we did a lot of training with the mentors. I'll be honest, year 1, a lot of not so great successes because it was a lot of implicit bias happening. But now that I think we're on year 4 right now, we do 2 cohorts every 6 months. We actually try to match opposites. So that not only are the mentees learning from their mentors and gaining some of that insider knowledge, but the mentors are learning from the mentees. And some of the stories we've had is we've gotten tons of job hires from that. So a lot of these mentors will bring them in as internships, bring them into meetings, get them a job. A lot of them have converted temp jobs into full-time jobs. They've helped them pave that pathway. And they're all keeping in touch. I think 60 to 70% are keeping in touch post the 6 months. So we're trying really hard to actually teach the mentors, teach more of these folks in the industry to be like, hey, look at these communities. They're hard workers. They're doing great. Why are you ignoring them?
Thanks, Sumi. I'm curious, Jesse, you brought up mentorship, but others who either personally you've had mentors, it sounds like, Tracy, that's a role you've chosen to make time for and really invest in, but how has it influenced either your career or what you're seeing happen? You or others, sorry, I pointed it.
Mentorship?
Yeah.
I would say this. So I've mentored a lot with Sundance, with USC, with Stanford. usually places that I have some kind of affiliation with. And I do it because, honestly, there's a desperation for it. I usually get emails or calls from somebody from USC or from Stanford, and they're like, there's not many people that are in your position. Can you please take this on? Because they'll have students that are like me, and they don't have anybody else to necessarily, get advice from. So it's become kind of a need-based thing. And I understand that because when I was in their shoes, I was looking for a mentor desperately, and there weren't a lot. There was like maybe Shonda Rhimes, but she was so hard to get to, and she was the only one. And that's hard because you're trying to figure out, well, how can I have a path? What steps can I take? And when no one is like you and what you're trying to do is not what's on the air, you feel hopeless. And so I feel like I have to talk to these students, or sometimes they're not even students, they're people in their 30s and 40s who are just coming into entertainment later, and they have a story to tell. And I do it because if we're not giving back and if we're not doing it, there is no direct connection, or there's no path forward, or there's no conversation where they feel like they have someone to help guide. And all of us are very different, and I can't do it all, obviously, but I try to give back in those ways. And what I've seen directly, I will put people up for jobs that I've mentored. I will hire them for my shows. I've done that. I'll hire them as assistants. I'll put them in contact with agents that are looking for them who had never known about them had I not gotten them from USC or from Sundance. So I try to be a connector in that way, and I try to guide and connect the writers with other people that are looking for them. But yeah, I do feel like we need more people like me mentoring, and we need more people just trying to reach out. It's overwhelming, but I do see how it does make a difference.
Yes, I would say she's mentored me, and the things that was different from like mentoring is like, I was in Chicago doing improv and sketch, and I wrote a sketch that went viral, and Tracy called me and was like, hey, this could be a movie. And then it was. And then I was a screenwriter, and then I was making the most money of my life. So it's not even just like, oh, here's knowledge. She was like, oh no, you'll learn by doing it. Like, that's the real, like, that's, information, if you want it, you can find it. A lot of people, like, you can like search. People don't have opportunity. They don't have the ability to continue to do stuff because they have to eat. They have to live. So the ability to give somebody mentorship through capital, like give me something I could take home. Like, and so like that really showed me that like individuals can be pipelines. And so I've now written multiple movies with people because I know if I co-write this movie with you, I can instantly make you a screenwriter. You can fuck the bullshit, skip it, excuse me. But like creating, like seeing the holes, and instead of trying to patch it, say jump over it. Like that felt like real mentorship, and wasn't just like a Band-Aid on a problem. It was, no, come here. I'm taking you with me. Not just giving you tips on how to get to where I am. No, stand next to me. And that is kind of, I think, what has been changing the industry, and what I've also learned from Tracy, and has changed people's lives in real life. And I hope that people recognize the personal power that they have to be pipelines, and not just necessarily wait for institutions to give you the power to do it.
And I have to jump in and say this. I don't know why I was sitting right next to you and forgetting that we had that relationship. But Dewayne is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Just insanely talented people that are out there, but the agencies or the studios and networks don't know they exist. And so now he's so, you're so well connected and you're doing incredibly well. But when I called him, he was like, oh my God, I can't believe you reached out. And I was like, I see your talent, and I want you to work, and I want more people to know you. But it takes that. And it doesn't mean if you're not already in the business, you don't have it. That's why I think Dewayne's the perfect example of it. But I just saw raw talent, and I knew other people in the business, so I had a frame of reference. And I'm like, I'm telling you, you can be better than the people that are working. You have it. But he just didn't have the connections at that moment. But I found that inspiring, because to see that I was right because you were doing so well. But yeah, there are people that just don't have the connections, and that's why we do need to make a greater effort, and that's why Sundance matters. Like, these type of programs do actually make a difference.
We're all going to want to be mentored by Tracy now. I'm sure that also is a burden that probably comes with the success too. So I want to acknowledge that is labor to make sure that these stories get told and that we are grateful for. But also, I think the systemic approach that Sumi is talking about, and that I think Sundance is invested in, is trying to figure out how do we get more people to help to bring that along. And so appreciate
so that the burden is not all.
Yeah,
on
so it's not
Tracy's.
exactly
It's not just
because
on
it
her.
is like, I think it's how this industry works, that connection, that labor, and your belief that Dewayne should be seen. But that takes your energy and your power,
and
and so helping you to diversify that so that we can all have the share in that, I think is really critical.
I think part of it is also cultural translation, seeing it as talent, not just some cultural thing I don't get. It's a black thing. It's from Chicago. I don't know how it would translate. While we have a myriad of independent films that are in nuanced white spaces about a girl going to find her cat in college, but that's a culture. That's a very specific culture. But we can see a universality in that, and just a kind of a cultural literacy, or somebody to be in the ears of the powers that be. No. This is actually incredible writing. Yeah. It's not about race. It's about writing. It's about a sense of an acumen. So us being, there's a lot of ways to, we need those translators all over the place just to see through the veil. It's what's that? Mike Myers and Austin Powers, like black, or mole, where you can't stop saying it. They just see it so often. They just, do I black? I don't, black, I don't, but it's not for me. Yeah. But it actually is brilliant.
Stacy, I'm going to ask you to talk, of course, a little bit about the inclusion lists where it makes sense, but I think you, more than anyone, I've had the opportunity to be mentored by and to learn from about this industry. You've seen the power of mentorship on campus, off campus, behind the camera, in front of the camera, in LA, which is like this crazy place, as somebody that's from Seattle. It's like a different planet. What have you seen the power of that, and what's the data telling us?
Well, with the inclusion list, it's really exciting because the people that we study, we almost feel like we know the people on the list, right? Because we've been in a creepy way.
He talks about you all.
Yes,
in the
we've
first
been
person.
following them. Like Gina Prince Bythewood, she's at the top of the list with the Woman King, right? Like, I've been following and stalking her for years. I feel like I have a parasocial relationship with her, right? Lots of people, Casey Lemons, right? Catherine Hardwick, who I met here at Sundance, has had a legacy. Lena Waithe, right? Lena was, I think, on the panel last year. These are people who we know are doing a phenomenal job. So to lift them up on the list and really highlight, and what we did on the list this year is we wanted to let people know who's doing it right by gender, race, ethnicity, LGBTQ+, people with disabilities, and age. And so on-screen storytelling, yes, age. That's really important, right? So because older characters, right, if you have somebody that's over 45, is a woman, and in particular, a woman of color, she's completely erased. Completely erased. So intersectionally, it was really important to us in all of our work to say, who can we celebrate that's doing well, whether it's on the list or in our research more broadly? So, and then we highlight directors, as I mentioned before, we highlight editors, and all of that is to serve. When somebody says, well, we can't find anyone, inclusionlist.org, because there they are. These are people that are making a ton of money and hiring people that look like the world we live in. And that's, I think, to be celebrated. Now, in terms of mentoring, all these spaces, what we need to do is unleash capital. That is like single-handedly, all the people on this panel have stories to tell. Like the whole Apple thing is horrible. And I've heard that so many times from so many content creators. They give me a deal and they never, like the first look, then it passes and nothing ever gets distributed, right? And so festivals are so important because we were all at Cannes a couple of years ago, and I happened to be in the crowd with Coco Francini and Kate Blanchett from Dirty Films. And we ended up huddling at the end of a talk and meeting and realizing I have access to people that have resources. Coco knows how to actually mentor. And I think it's been a year and a half, we're about to unleash 11 short films from women, trans, and non-binary content creators that can then be financed as feature films. That mentorship matters with capital. And I have to give a shout out to Netflix. They underwrote the entire thing. So these 11 people that you're going to meet, I mean, the stories are incredible, but it's exactly what we're talking about, right? That mentorship, I didn't do it. Coco did as a producer of Dirty Films, and bringing on people that could help shepherd those stories that maybe she didn't have lived experience with, but they're amazing. And so mentorship, I think, is so broad, but it's where we have the opportunity. Like, there's a student in a room that I'm dying to meet. She emailed me yesterday saying, I'm here, Alexa, wherever you are.
Raise your hand.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe she didn't make it. Maybe there's another compelling panel that she's in. But
Blew it, Alexa.
But where we can.
She was gonna mentor you.
Where is she? I love it. But where we can, doing what we can with what we have or with what other people have. And you, Amy White, and the Adobe Foundation have done that exactly the same. I called you and said, these folks are the real deal, right? And so where we can find philanthropists and get them to these folks to write checks, right? Whatever we can do in that process becomes really important. I'm not gonna mentor content creation, but I know people who can, right? And I can make calls. And so whatever we can do, I think it's in our best interest, it's in the audience's best interest, and it's what makes you come alive when you see the light go on in somebody's eyes because they actually have a shot, because everybody else has said no.
Yeah, thanks, Stacy. Well, that is a perfect segue to my last question, which is optimism. So one thing right now, in a sea that could be less optimistic, what's one thing that leaves you optimistic about the year ahead?
I am optimistic about funding resources, distribution platforms outside of the U.S. I'm interested in Africa. Yeah. I'm interested in opportunities in Europe and elsewhere. There's a lot of places to fund projects, fund creative endeavors, and watch them, and also just to have a more expansive perspective. We are not the center of the world. And so there's a whole, it's all ahead of us, honestly. So I'm really excited about that.
My perception is a lot more bleak, but I think for me and for the participants that we work with, based on, they've had a lot of opinions, thoughts about, what happened on Monday. And I think the biggest thing for them, and thanks to Adobe for, being a contributor to this, is the fact that they're going to have technology at their hands to be able to tell their stories no matter what. And so I think for us, with Adobe's partnership with other funders that we have, even though the country might be telling them, no, you don't matter, DE&I doesn't matter, et cetera, at least they have that technology, that phone in their hand, or whatever piece of technology they're using to continue telling their stories. And people like us at film festivals like this are going to continue telling those stories and pushing them out, and that does give me hope.
I think I'm most excited about Gen Z, and so we're pivoting a lot of our research to the audience and what the audience wants to help content creators make that argument to financiers that this audience is in fact different and it represents the voices of so many different people. They don't talk about D&I because it's a value so important to them, it's baked into everything. And so we're gonna be doing a lot of research to help illuminate that, give it to people who make decisions, and hopefully unleash capital in that direction.
I'll say two things. I am excited because I think sometimes racism provides an opportunity to corner a market because I think the execs are going to be so focused on satisfying one group that there's a whole lot of people that are going to be starved for content, and if you are a content creator and you find financing and you care, you can get that made and you can go and satisfy the millions and millions of other people that are desperately looking for that. And that also equals money. So I think we have to like think about the fact that that void is an opportunity. And then the other thing is, more than I've ever experienced in my life, there are a lot of rich people of color. So I'm fine. That didn't happen in my 20s. Like, everybody was broke for some reason, but for some reason right now, I keep like meeting or hearing about, oh, there's this random Black lady that just started a financing group and she's looking to spend $3 million. And I'm like, I'll take that. So there's money out there. If you're not looking in a traditional like way, they're just individuals who just want to blow money for whatever reason. But there are people out there that are outside of LA that just have money and they want to get into film. It does not matter where the money, well, don't be like doing illegal stuff. It does matter, sorry.
Taking a turn.
I mean, yes, that took a dark turn. It doesn't have to come from the industry or LA. It could literally be somebody's rich uncle from, I don't know, Idaho that wants to get into film. And that if that check clears, you can still make a movie. And people sometimes are hyper-focused on just the industry. And I'm like, you don't need anything but capital sometimes to make something. Capital and technology and creativity. So just think outside the box and then go to that audience that the mainstream people are not serving, and you can make a lot of money. So I'm really happy about that.
I agree. And I would just add, I have optimism around kind of the results of bad. Like, I live by this quote by this fantastic group called Crime Mob. And it's, if you don't give a damn, I don't give a fuck. And the idea is that there's very clear bad that's happening. And the hope is that because that is so clear, that it's also very clear what is then good. And so people are able to then corral around the good and recognize the spaces that like, oh, you're not going to prosper there. So let's all stop trying and just go over here and do it together over there, because that's where we can do it. And we have the freedom to do it better than what we were allowed to do in the spaces that we were trying to fight for. And so that mindset is something that I feel like I've adopted and many people around me have. And I feel like that collectively has a lot of power.
Those are very good answers.
They were. I also love that we started swearing toward the end. Yeah. It really gave me like.
You know,
Well, that unfortunately, really unfortunately, I bet we could at least do another 10 minutes. But we have to wrap our time. But I think when I think about optimism, I think about this panel. And I have the really unique fortune, along with Brycey and several colleagues in this room, to try to unlock capital and to work with you all and to figure out how we don't take up too much space as white leaders, but also that we take up enough space to speak truth to folks. And I think every time I sit on a panel like this or sit in a room, we were across the street at Macro earlier, their vibe is hot, if you can get in the house. We are making that change. What is it? If you don't give a damn, I don't give a fuck.
I don't give a fuck.
Like, yes. And so I'm really, really energized and grateful for your leadership, for continuing to speak truth in hard spaces and in welcoming ones. And I'm really grateful for all of you for tuning in and making sure that this continues to be a priority, that we don't just talk about at Sundance, that we keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And so thank you for taking the time. Thank you for making space for the conversation. I do need to give a little bit of plug, just because the Adobe Foundation also wanted to acknowledge the impact of the wildfires that took place in LA that, of course, impacts this creative community so desperately, particularly folks, I think, off camera. And so the Adobe Foundation has made a couple $1 million in grants, and around the room there's QR codes, and we're matching anything you can give. It can be $1, it can be $250,000. You go crazy. But we want to make sure we're a part of that recovery in the long run, so that we can continue to do great work and support the folks in the industry. So thank you for joining today. Thank you to our esteemed panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.